Oh, my hair is everywhere. I'm trying not to pull my hair because it changes shape. All right, we are live. Hello. Hello and good evening. Welcome to the dark side. We're going to give a couple of seconds really for people to get on, but we value all of you who come back and watch it afterwards. So we always give you a nice little intro here. This is the Coming Storm and Pastor Purple. Tonight's subject is a lot darker than my tone is letting on. But as you know, we here on the dark side believe it is important to educate you, to talk about topical issues, to bring you up to date with history and knowledge. So welcome to the dark side. And without further ado, I am going to introduce with our news stories. And I'm going to stop moving because I hear that my chair is squeaking. So I'm going to try and sit perfectly still, which is very difficult for me to do. I'm trying to sit perfectly still and do the rest. How about that? Okay, so you know that we like to give you some European news, and I like to keep you up to date with what's happening. We have people who watch from all over the globe here on the dark side, and I think it's important. The conversation surrounding anti-racism can be very USA centric because there it is so overt and so obvious. But that blindsides us to the fact that it happens everywhere, wherever there are colonial powers. So today I have two news stories on this subject that really will make you question life, I think, in some ways. The first news story dropped today, and it's out of Germany. The far-right group there called Neo-Nazis, I apologize if I've said that incorrectly, Neue, was a sign. They had to be stopped by police in full-out riot gear. They were at the border of Poland and Germany, and they were there armed with pepper spray, bayonets, there you go, and machete, batons, and all sorts of things to stop migrants from coming into Germany. And why, you would ask, would they be there? Well, there is a political party in Germany called the Third Way, and they have openly called for people, the Germans, to go to any lengths possible, as I understand it, to stop immigration. Now, on the border of Poland and Germany, there have been estimates that about 6,000 people have crossed illegally, according to the estimations. These estimations are very difficult. And what is illegal crossing when once you're into Germany, you're going to have to sign up for things and actually claim asylum. And, you know, the definition of illegal immigration is quite an interesting definition, if you ask me. It's only illegal, it seems, if you are coming from a non-Western country into a Western country, but that's a different subject and not this evening's subjects. What I found really interesting is that what I find really interesting about this news story is, of course, the work that the Germans have done to teach, to really own the kind of dark side of their history from World War II, the effort that has been put into ensuring the education process. I was listening to someone this week who was talking about the fact that if you set up their education system, they start from preschool, teaching about the sanctity of life, the sanctity of all people, and they push that through every single age group, and it escalates and it builds and it layers up until you really get to the critical thinking in your teenage years regarding World War II and the Holocaust and those sorts of things. And I thought, even in a country that's made such huge efforts to really own their part in at least one incident, there are arguments that they don't own all of their history, but in at least one incident, you still have this neo-Nazi movement, and still people seem to think that it's okay to have political parties that are not just affiliated, but actively calling for this. And that's not hate speech, and that's not wrong. And that there aren't consequences to that. I mean, it's great that the police showed up, and by all accounts, they've sent an extra 600 armed police down to the border in Poland, Germany, that border, and they will send more. They're there day and night trying to ensure that the neo-Nazis are not there, but that all crossings are legal. Yes, that's a new story. That was literally dropping this week. Can you imagine? So not too far from where we are.
Yeah. Just about the German one where you talk about them owning their past sins. Um, I think it's important to put that into context, where they own what they did in regards to the Jews,
Mm,
but they do not own what they did in regards to their colonial empire and the
right,
atrocities that they committed, um, particularly in Africa, where the majority of their colonies were.
right.
And you have to remember that Germany's colonies were only confiscated. Don't ask me how you confiscate a country, okay? From
If you
Germany,
don't laugh, you'll cry. That's my theory on that one. If you laugh, you're going to
yeah,
cry.
but they were only confiscated at the Treaty of Versailles. So we're talking, early 1900s, okay? And actually, the atrocities that were committed towards the Jews in the Second World War, some historians have actually traced back to the atrocities they committed
Yes,
in their colonies.
yes,
And so I think we need to have that conversation that
yes.
actually, no, they haven't fully owned up to their wrongdoings because they've only gone so far.
Yes. And I try to bring that out as a point. They've owned one part of their issue. It's not the full story. And I think it's important that when we talk about colonialism, it's a systemic issue. It's not about one incident. It's about the whole narrative. It's about the whole wealth of power that has been amassed on the backs of other people. And that brings us nicely onto our story out of the United Kingdom. So in the United Kingdom, we're just going to move on to it because there's no easy way to say this. As you know, one of my pet subjects, one of the things that causes me to talk quite a lot is decolonializing education. I really firmly believe that that's an issue with our experience here in the Netherlands, but also mine as a teacher in the UK. And this week, an A-level textbook had to be withdrawn from circulation. And the reason it had to be withdrawn from circulation, this textbook had been in use, it had been taken to classrooms, it had been used in classroom as the textbook for history, and the book was approved in circulation. But one tutor got hold of it, and when they got hold of it, they were trying to understand one particular question. And because the question was so deeply offensive and racist, they obviously put into the complaints procedure. And subsequently to that, it has had to be withdrawn from withdrawn from circulation. This is the challenge that we have here. This is what the question was. I'm going to read it for you because I think you need to hear the question. To what extent do you believe the treatment of Native Americans has been exaggerated?
Yeah, okay.
Answers on a postcard, okay? Right, so you understand the level of embedded racism, institutional problem. The fact that other teachers had been using this material, it went through committee after committee. To get a textbook approved is no easy feat. It takes time, it's arduous, people have to check it. This is going into the hands of very impressionable young people. And the picture, I mean, if you go over to the Pastor Purple Facebook page, the official page, you'll see there the official link. When you see the picture, like with the balancing scales and the question underneath, you really, you're just like, this is why we need to start from scratch with the education. So I have a little bit of homework for our viewers. I've been listening to a podcast by Dr. Muna Abdi. It's called Becoming an Anti-Racist. She is very much into decolonializing education. She has a lot of decolonializing education specialists that come onto the show. It's a really short season 1, but really insightful in understanding the importance. And one episode that she did that really kind of solidified my point and why this is almost too late. She did one for preschoolers, decolonializing preschool education. And when I think about that, it never occurred to me really to think about the trauma that's being done from such a young age to children in terms of race, gender, and all of the other things that happen within that. And how once you get to A levels, so many people had read that page and no one had thought, maybe we shouldn't have this as a textbook. Maybe the very question is offensive at its core. That book has now been withdrawn from circulation, at least at this time. I'm sure that you can find a copy if you're very interested. Yeah. What can we say? Would you like some fun news?
Sure.
In fun news, in good news, in church news this week. So in church news this week, we have the ordination of Pastor Kimberly Bolgen. I thought we'd bring you some good news. This is good news for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. She is going to be the first woman ordained to the Central States Conference Mid-America Union. Those are very technical terms for anyone who watches this that isn't a Seventh-day Adventist, but it basically means she's the first ordained woman in her area, in her part of the country of the United States. This is amazing. She is the founder of the Love God, Love Sex movement, which is wonderful. And in the face of that, being a beautiful, strong, intelligent, self-care advocated Black female pastor, we can't big that up enough that she's been ordained as the first woman in her conference. So congratulations to Pastor Kimberly Bolgen. She shares a name with me, I found out. It was quite fun to do. And we got baptized at the same age. I'm just saying. Just saying. Just putting it out there. Similarities.
Congratulations.
So now that the good stuff, the fun stuff has been done and the news stories are over, it falls to me.
There's one more piece of good news, actually.
Oh, there's a piece of good news? I'm up for good news. What's that?
Yeah. Liverpool clapped up Man United 5-0.
In football news, Liverpool won. What did you score?
5-0.
5-0? 5-0?
At Old Trafford. So, of course, it's a great day for me.
Oh, so those of you who don't watch football, or soccer as it's known in some crazy parts of the world, but football, Liverpool and Man United, there's no love lost. Liverpool went to Man United's home and beat them 5-0.
So if there's any United fans out there watching, give me a high five, yeah? Right.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
We love you all, so, keep going. It's all right. Football news is over. We're going to dig into today's topic. Today's topic is taken from an article or a research piece, really, I think. It's a long article. If you want the link, it's over on the Pastor Purple Facebook page. Please like, subscribe, do all of the stuff, because it's easier to get your updates there. You'll see what subjects are coming up on the Sunday for the dark side. We're pushing all the way through to Christmas break now, so we're here every week, Sundays, 9 p.m. Central European time, live on YouTube, Facebook, and you can always watch it back, share it with your friends, do the thing. Yes, good. But the ProPublica article was published on October 8th, 2021. I need to say the full date because I think it's important to understand how recent this is. And the title of the article is Black Children Were Jailed for a Crime That Doesn't Exist and Almost Nothing Happened to the Adults in Charge. So just let that sit for a minute. So I'm going to try and give you what is a very detailed article, but I'm going to try and give you the overview of the article. So there was an incident at a school where 4 and 5-year-olds were having a fight. Now, if you've ever been anywhere near a school, you will see children have those little, "Don't you touched me, he hit me" moments. This particular incident was filmed, and some other children were trying to break it up. They were telling the children, stop, don't do this, don't do that. The school in question is Hobgood Elementary School in Murfreesboro in Tennessee. I'm sorry, I'm not American, so none of those words made any sense to me when I was reading it. I have to be honest with you. And what happens next is shocking, to say the least. 3 police officers turn up at the school to arrest 4 children. And I say children deliberately because the youngest was 8, and they count children as under 12s in this particular case. Oh, sorry, I mistook. The children were 4 and 5 that were up fighting. They were 5 and 6. My apologies for the incorrect information there. Right, so they turn up to arrest 4 of the children. This is the first 4 of 10 that are finally arrested. So in order to do this, you apparently need to go with 3 police officers to a school. One police officer was very gung-ho and ready to arrest any child with handcuffs and all sorts of things. Another police officer was telling the head teacher, no, do not comply, don't listen, don't do this, we're not arresting these girls. And the third police officer was completely silent, as if rooted to the spot, it seemed, in shock. What continues is that despite all of this, these children were removed from class. They were put in handcuffs. They were thrown into the back of cars. There were no charges for the children. No one knew what crime they had committed. The person who had issued and said they would be there to carry out the warrant was waiting for them at the county juvenile detention center instead of being where she said she would be. The County Juvenile Detention Center is a 2-tiered jail for children. There are 48 beds, 48 cells with 64 beds and dozens of surveillance cameras. At this point, when we're looking at the story from the perspective of the 4 girls that have been arrested, 4 little black girls that have been arrested aged 8 to 12, what we see is that in the state of Tennessee, the lockup rate for children is 5%. In this particular borough, Murfreesboro, it was in Rutherford, it was 48%. This was being done under the guise of Judge Donna Scott. You will need to know these names because it's really not good. Anyway, the questions that were being raised by the officers in question, knowing all of this information as they stood there at the school, was this school is 2/3 Black and Latino children. Is this happening down the road at the white school? 9 out of 10 students in that school are poor students. At the point that the arrests are happening, everyone is crying. The head teacher is crying. She's been shouted at. She's been abused by the white police officer who's really gung-ho to arrest these children. The children are crying and screaming for their parents. They're throwing up because they're being arrested and they don't understand what's happening to them. Their children, other children who are witnessing this are crying. Teachers are crying. The black police officer who was telling everybody not to comply and trying to de-escalate the situation is holding back his tears. But mass arrest was what was the order of the day, and they were arrested. The judge in question who supported this whole action and who is responsible for the 48% lockup rate in her county of Rutherford describes herself as mother of the county. She describes it as a crisis of the children. These are her quotations. So the question had to be asked, if she is mother, why has she never been charged with any of the crimes for failing the children that she's in charge of? Instead, she locks them up and she sells them off. She says that she is on God's mission. This cannot get any more offensive, you might think, but it does. She says she has locked up children as young as 7 regularly. And then when you dig into her history, it turns out that she's failed the bar 7 times. And after she's been appointed to Rutherford County, she's violated federal law 191 times. Yet still she has her job and the warrant is issued for these 4 children. I know you're going to ask me the question, what had the children done? The children were guilty of the non-crime of not stopping a fight. I kid you not, that's what they said. They were inciting or yeah, it's difficult to comprehend. So, in cases outside of Rutherford, what is normal for a child if they get themselves into an actual criminal situation? This isn't an actual criminal situation, but what happens outside of Rutherford? Well, normally what happens is if a child is involved in an action that seems criminal, a summons is sent to the parent, and the parent is supposed to take the child. That is what the federal law says is supposed to happen. What happens within Rutherford is that police officers are sent to schools, to daycare centers, to any place that children are, and the children are arrested with no charges, with no parents, with no one to accompany the children. And then they are reprimanded to custody immediately after seeing the judge. Once she herself has been reprimanded for her conduct many times, as I've said. Once appealed, if you can get to the appeal level with this court judge, it's always overturned. But you have to get there first. And what happens then is she doesn't comply. And I'm not going to go into the story that the article does, but there is a story within the article that lays out a case in which she literally aided and abetted in the stealing of a child. Longer story.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and just give the story of this one case and this one. Anyway, okay.
Well, I think the criminality of this judge needs to be stated. I think it needs to be clear that she is a criminal.
She is a criminal. She has violated, she has broken the criminal law 191 times, federal law. 190. If you or I broke federal law one time, we're going to jail. This woman has done it 191 times. Okay. I mean, she is a criminal. And where has she done this? She's done this from the sitting position as judge. And she's doing this in the case of these 4 young women. I said young women. Jesus help me. These 4 girls, children. 4 children. She is doing exactly. So there's another 4 on top of the 191 she had from before. Let me just say that. Okay. In Rutherford County, in 2016, they had jailed 986 children for a total of 7,932 days. They had been put into solitary confinement. And why is it important that I tell you that date? It's important I tell you that date because you will remember that President Barack Obama passed a law that said it is illegal for children to be placed in solitary confinement. So what does she do when she wants to break the law? They're not in solitary confinement. They are in isolation. She changed the words. And apparently if you just change the name, I'm not breaking federal law by locking up kids and putting them in solitary confinement. Okay.
I must try that one day. I did not rob the bank. I simply liberated it of its funds.
If you just change one word, apparently that changes the entire situation. Anyway. Okay. To continue with this case. These children were arrested. They were locked up. The girls were later released, but the 6 boys who were arrested with them remained in custody without cause. So there's an illegal arrest. There's no crime. There's no reason. By the way, the children who had fought were not the ones that got arrested. It's all the children that were standing around that watched it that got arrested. And when questioned, the children who were fighting said, "Oh, but we're best friends now. Isn't it all finished?" They were so confused. Parents traumatized. Their children have been removed without any permission. So what she does, it's hard to actually explain the depth of evil that happens in this case because I cannot reconcile what I'm reading with what I'm saying, if that makes sense. So what you're reading is that they have no charges. There is no crime. These are children. I can look in my rooms in my own house and see children that are this age. I can look at the local school and see children that are this age that have been arrested. They've been handcuffed. They've been thrown in police cars. They've not had any parents. They've been put into isolation. They've been held for at least 7 to 8 days, each child. They're not supposed to be held at all. And if they are held, even if it's a crime, they're only supposed to be held for 24 hours. So she's breaking the law again and again. Every single action is an illegal action. When all of this finally comes to fruition and gets before a appeals judge, of course, because it's not, she's just convicting everybody and sending them to jail, it's thrown over and all of the children are released. The trauma that is done to those children is far-reaching. The trauma that is done to the parents. I mean, I can't imagine standing at work, being somewhere, and someone calling me and saying, one of my children had been arrested at school. The police came to the school, put the child in handcuffs, and took them to a jail cell. And I don't know where my child, that to me is so unconscionable. Like, it's just outside of what I can fathom as a reality. But I think we need to fathom this as a reality, because under this watch, they have managed to build a new facility for this process, because while it is illegal, she still has her own way of running her county, which is contrary to that of Tennessee's rules. She is still allowed to do this, and they build a state-of-the-art $23 million facility. But this doesn't run smoothly, because the first consultancy they bring in to build the facility said, you can't build a facility to hide the fact that you are arresting and locking up children so that people won't see it. Not that you're going to stop doing it, but that the reason you want the new facility is that people don't see you treating children this way. Because in the old facility, there was a lot of sight access. I could see what was happening, and this was looking bad. So instead, let's put up some walls around it. So the firm says, no, we don't agree to this. And in that case, because the firm disagreed, all their suggestions were ignored. The firm was sacked, and they found another company to come in and do this $23 million facility, in which you can be arrested, taken into custody, go into the judge's chambers, and be taken back into the permanent facilities where you will be housed, all in one run. There's just one circle. You just come into the one building. Once you are arrested, you come into that building into temporary holding. Then you go before the judge, and the judge sends you to your jail cell. It said that there are 1,500 children that have been wrongfully imprisoned under her watch. There are 500 wrongful arrests. And because Tennessee then has stepped in and said, you can't do this other alternative system you've been using. So you need to stop using this alternative measurement system, which is basically she decides that children are guilty and sends officers to go get those kids. And then the lawyers don't know what's happening. Everything's being done in secret. It's one facility. The kids are getting rushed through. Nobody's able to question the process. You're not able to get access to the documents. Everything is behind closed doors. Because she has this alternative system, they said, oh, we don't want you to do that. So what they've done is said, oh, but we have this great $23 million facility that you could lock up your kids in. And so they've started advertising it as a place to send all of Tennessee's children who would end up in criminal justice system for $175 per day. And they're really pleased with this. They think this is a great advertising campaign.
Well, I think there's a couple of points that I think should be mentioned. One is that when they were talking about the new facility, the committee that ran it, that comments were made that it was a business and they wanted to run it for profit. Okay.
Yes.
I think that's That's important to bring
That's
out.
important to say, yeah.
And the other thing is that she calls herself mother of the community. The problem is that when you were speaking about the first consultancy firm that they bought in, the first consultancy firm looked at what was happening, told them, wait there, but you're locking up children at rates that far exceed the state average. You know,
48%
right?
compared to
You
their
shouldn't,
5% state average.
right. So you shouldn't be doing this. It's too much. You need to look at ways to actually decrease your incarceration rate. And what they actually recommended was that you build the facility, but smaller, and that actually you attach another separate part on site for children that have run away. So children that might be in danger or threat or something like
Mhm,
this.
mhm.
I think it's important to state that they got rid of the first consultancy firm and ignored building any facilities for at-risk children who might be
Mhm,
runaways or anything like this.
mhm, mhm.
So when you call yourself mother of the state, what kind of mother are you that you don't want a home for your children? And secondly, she says that she's doing God's work. I just want to point out that Baal was considered a god, so
Which God you serving?
you know, yeah.
It ain't the Judeo-Christian God. Let's just make that very clear. God, that God, and you ain't in the same ballpark. Yeah? You on God's mission. Who God? Which God? Okay.
So yeah, I just think those are important points to bring out. But yeah, carry on. Sorry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think when the statistics are read out, you're talking about 1,500 wrongfully imprisoned children, 500 wrongfully arrested children, 7,932 days in jail in 1 year for 986 kids. That's just 1 year. That's ridiculous. And when I can't think how anyone would look at this story and think locking up children in a prison facility, because that's what it is okay. It's okay to arrest a child and lock them up. And I'm going to make this point, and I think I really want to make just a couple of points about childhood. The dominant factor here that she's locking up all poor children and predominantly children from Black and brown backgrounds. Okay, so all the children come from poor homes, and predominantly those children that she's targeting are from Black and brown backgrounds. That's what they're colluding to do. When we're talking about children, I really need people to really stop and just think about childhood. When you were a child, and I have the story as well as everybody else, I remember once being in a store, and we'd gone to a local shopping center, and my mum always said no to everything. Can I have this? No. Can you have that? No. That's how it felt to me as I was little. I must have been about 4 or 5 years old. I don't think my sisters were even born then. And I went to the shop, and there was this piano eraser. And I just really loved this piano eraser. And I don't know what came over my head from this side to that side, but whatever it was, that piano eraser left the store with me. I was 4 or 5 years old. I remember my mum realizing that I had this thing in my hand. It was in my pocket and I was trying to hide it. And she berated me on the street, marched me right back to that store, made me apologize to the owner and give back the eraser. I think the owner felt sorry for me in the end. I was a 4 or 5 little girl, pigtails, there I stood. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't. In this state, under this woman, I would have been in jail, criminalized for the rest of my life. Bear in mind that once you're within the criminal justice system in the United States, you get stripped of your right to vote. You get stripped of your humanity from a very young age. You are then being put at risk of I can't say the word recidivism.
Recidivism.
Thank you. That word. The repeat offender rate increases once you've been in jail. And for these children, they're at risk of that because they're in the category already of being vulnerable and at risk. These are poor children. They're in a poor poor, literally no money, fiscally poor children, that makes children vulnerable to a lot of different influences and problems within local communities that are under-resourced, underfunded. They don't have the funding within school to deal with these children. And so this county has decided that instead of funding a school, funding a morning breakfast program, funding an after-school program, funding a clothing bank or a food bank or anything that would help these children to have better lives, what we'll do is we'll make sure that anytime a child does anything, and bear in mind that children do things every day because they're children and they're allowed to, it's a learning process, you're going to lock them up. And when your state finally steps in and says the rules that you are holding these children to are illegal, please stop, your response is, we've spent 23 million on this beautiful facility. We need to make some money, $175 a day. We're going to advertise to everyone in the state that this is a great place for you to send criminal children. Criminal. So are you saying that because I stole an eraser, I'm a criminal? No, I'm not a criminal. I'm a kid. Kids do silly things. They're children. These people are locking up 5, 6. The youngest person she said to have locked up was 4, all the way through to 12-year-olds. That's the age range that we're talking about. I can't even process that kind of evil, to be honest. And this was quite a painful week because Mr. Storm over here has kept at me that nothing had changed and that I kept saying, well, that, I don't feel like this would happen to us out here in Europe. This is not going to happen here in the Netherlands. And then no sooner had the words left my mouth than I got bit in the butt by the Dutch childcare benefit scandal. Some of you will remember that. We've talked about it before, posted on it before. The government decided to falsely accuse 2,000 parents of theft, basically, of what is it called when you try to take money? Fraud. Thank you, fraud. It was false. It was incorrect. It wasn't true. It's been gone over and over again in the media. It now turns out that 1,100 children were taken from those parents and taken into care from those parents, and no one's actually quite sure if those children have been returned. No one can quite find the information and figures on how many of those children have been returned, if all of those children have been returned. Those parents were criminalized. They've been left homeless in some cases. They've been left in debt that they cannot get out of. They've been left without their children. It seems to me that as soon as I open my mouth, that every single time that we talk about the intersectionality of poverty and childhood, the answer from governments is, I know what we'll do, is we'll build a £23 million facility to lock up the criminal children. Do you know that sounds like an oxymoron? Criminal child. Children do naughty things, obviously. Children do deliberate actions. And there are some children who really do step over, of course, and commit murder. And there's been incidents in the last week of children who've had to be arrested on the grounds of murder. Okay. But that's like 1 in 63 million, right? It's not like childhood criminal. There's a problem with the sentence, the construction of the sentence, the fact that you have a $23 million facility in which you are trying to encourage all of the boroughs, all of the state, the whole state, to send their children to you, which means then that the parents no longer have access to their own children, you understand, because they're being sent to another part of the state. The state of Tennessee is a big state, it's not a small space. And these are poor families, so they won't be able to travel to see and visit their child. The children end up in solitary confinement for up to 23 hours a day. The damage that you're doing, literally, it's a business. It really is. And I can only say that when you put critical services like prisons as a business, locking up children is not out of bounds. That is something that's always on the cards, apparently. And I don't know, I have nothing else to say, really. I can't. So I'm just going to turn it over to TC Storm now. And y'all enjoy the show. That was my part.
Right. So I yeah, when I first brought the story to you, and then I gave you my view on it, and I said to you that this was intentional. And I carry on from existing policies. You disagreed with me, and we had a warm conversation or discussion regarding this matter. But the more I've looked at it, the more I'm firmly of the position that what this is, it's a carryover from policies of colonial nations to take children away from the indigenous people. So I just want to begin what I'm about to say, with the preface that conservatives and people in positions of power love to give this, or they love to talk about the ills in society and blame it on broken families. When you take a child away from their parents, you break a family. And I think this is a critical point, and it's hypocritical of people to talk about, single parent families and call them broken homes when you are creating and enacting policies that take children away from their families and break homes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, yeah, because let's be real, a home is no less broken when you steal a child as when a parent walks out. Okay.
I would probably argue that it's more broken when you steal a child than when a parent voluntarily leaves for the good health and well-being of the children.
Look,
Like,
yeah.
that's not an equal thing. I can still visit my child. This idea that homes are broken because they don't have two parents living in the home is nonsense. Because of course you can have two very active parents in a child's life. They don't have to live in the same space to do that. But if you take the child away, house is mashed. Sorry.
As I said, for me, look, a home is no less broken when you steal a child, right? So, criminal justice systems in Western nations have always targeted the indigenous populations and people of color. These nations, they have a history of kidnapping minority children, and I see the current juvenile justice system as an extension of these policies. We talk of the school to prison pipeline system that exists in the USA, and I contend that the same systems exist in countries like the UK, Canada, Australia, the Netherlands, and although there might be differences in how these systems manifest themselves, the effects of these systems are the same.
Yeah.
All right. So in Western Australia, an Indigenous or First Nations child, I want you to give me a figure. In fact, I told you this earlier this week, so we'll see if you remember. How much more likely is an Indigenous or First Nations child in Western Australia likely to be locked up and arrested than a white child?
See, my original answer was 6. I think you told me it was like 600.
No, that's a bit much.
It was like
It's 50.
50.
I mean,
there.
that's still
I mean, it
that's
was
still
like
insane,
some ridiculous number.
right?
50 times more likely.
And so my question to you will be, how is this any different to the stolen generation that Australia or what they call the stolen generation.
Mm.
And what white Australia has tried to do is draw a line under it and say, well, this happened during this time period. And then that was it. And it was horrific. It shouldn't have happened. But your policies are still ripping Indigenous children away from their families.
Yep.
Right. So, and the stolen generation, for those that don't know, was it's a name given to a generation of Indigenous children that were taken from their parents um, by the white state, by the Australian government, under the belief that white people would do a better job of raising their Indigenous children than their Indigenous parents. Right? That was the sole reason for taking these children away, and why they're called the stolen generation. So I have a quote for you regarding the current state of what's happening in Australia and why the discrepancy is so big. And it's from Kriti Sharma, who is a senior researcher for Human Rights Watch. And she says it is a result of years of dispossession, structural discriminations, intergenerational trauma, and definitely racism. Okay. So these are the reasons that she is giving for why children are being taken away at such a disproportional rate from Aboriginal First Nations people in Australia. Right. I want to give you another quote. If you're Black, you're treated more harshly by the criminal justice system than if you're white. Whose words do you think those would be from?
Which country? Because that could be applied to any country. I don't. You
Well,
want me?
and they're in.
Were they said in Britain? Were they said in the Netherlands? Were they said in France? Were they said in Germany? Were they said in Canada? Were they said? I mean, where were they said?
And therein perhaps lies a point. Okay, but they were said by Theresa May on her first speech as Prime Minister.
You mean the woman that we talked about last week that took the people them and threw them out? In fact, deleted their information so she could throw them out of the country. Then she said, "Oh, the justice system is so much more difficult on Black people than it is on everyone else."
Now, and
well,
this
of course,
is
you did the policy, love.
So she's now Prime Minister, but her previous post before that was Home Secretary. And she had control over justice and things like this. And during her tenure as Home Secretary, she only made the situation worse for Black people.
Wasn't this just a manifesto? Wasn't that what she was? I mean, I don't mean to be rude, but this wasn't oh my gosh, shock news. I've learned something. Oh, the system is so much harsher for Black people. Wasn't this? I'm making the system harder for Black people actively. Like, isn't that a manifesto promise for us?
But you see, and that is the point that I'm trying to make. So she's in a position of power, directly responsible for justice, which is the Home Office. Okay. And she does nothing to improve it. She gets into position of Prime Minister and then wants to talk about it. Well, when you are actually in a position of power to do something about it, you did nothing.
Well, it's not that you did nothing, it's that you made it worse.
Oh, yes, she made it worse. Okay, she did nothing to improve it. Okay.
She actively made it worse.
Right. And so for me, that goes to say that people know exactly what's happening. Anybody trying to plead ignorance is a liar. You know exactly what is happening because you can't go from Home Secretary you go to bed as Home Secretary, wake up as Prime Minister, and then suddenly you're aware of it that very same day you wake up. It's what? It came into your dream? Who you, Joseph? You know?
Well, for those of you that have watched The Dark Side before, watch last week's episode if you would like to hear more about Theresa May.
Right. So then in Britain in 2018, an official report concluded that black teenagers get longer jail sentences for the same crimes as their white counterparts and are less likely to receive a non-custodial sentence. Right? So we're dealing now with, once again, juveniles in the justice system, and Britain is telling you we are treating them unfairly. It's all in our official records. We're all aware of this, but hey, it's business as usual.
And for those of you who wonder what the school to prison pipeline looks like in a country that's not the United States of America. So the school to prison pipeline is a term that you often hear referenced in terms of the United States of America, that they are taking young black boys and girls, predominantly boys, and they are just rushing them through the system and into jail, basically. That's what the term is known for. So how does that work in a country like the United Kingdom, where the availability of guns and things like that are less so? What could a school do to encourage the school to prison pipeline? Well, the statistics tell us that I think it's 95% of juvenile offenders have been excluded from school. And so what this means is the one of the youngest children that was excluded, there was a study, there was a BBC documentary on him. He was excluded 5 times by the age of 3. 3 years old, excluded. That means they refused to have him come to nursery, not school. School is from 5 in the UK. It's not. So, and they follow him in this show. I think the documentary is called "Could a Black Person Become President?" It's very well documented in the UK. You can watch that. It has all the statistics on the school to prison pipeline. But what they do is they begin the exclusion process. Once you are excluded from school, you have no access to education. You can't be around your own peers. Of course, parents are still working. What do those children do? There is not a mechanism for them. And of course, that encourages criminality, because once the child is out of school and they should legally be in education, whenever they're outside of their house, if they're without a parent, the police stop them. Stop and search powers. Okay, so the police will then stop them and the harassment begins. And that school to prison pipeline, just it kicks into gear. So you exclude the child from a very young age. You keep excluding the child when they're out of school, because nobody cares, nobody wants anything to do with this child. They are under stop and search orders. The police will come up to them all the time, and you are encouraging criminality, if not ending up falsely imprisoning those children, or just making up crimes, I guess. I don't know, but the children end up in jail. And that's what it looks like in the UK.
From my experience of police in the UK, they make stuff up. But anyway, I got stories to tell. Anyway, so the youth justice statistics for 2019-2020 in the UK reports that children in youth custody has actually fallen. The number of children in youth custody has fallen. And so how do I then contend that this is still a manifestation of policies designed to take children away from Indigenous and Black peoples? Well, although the number of children has taken into custody has declined, the actual percentage ratio for Black children taken into custody has almost doubled in a 10-year period.
So you basically stopped arresting white poor kids and only arrested Black children? I mean, that's the only explanation for that?
Right. So in this 10-year period, I also want to say that during this 10-year period, not only has the percentage of Black children that have been taken into custody increased, what has also happened, coincidentally, is that the average sentence duration during this period has also increased.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it went up by nearly 7 months. So you have
you've asked for a question, not to interrupt your flow, but we have a question that's come in from Henny, and he's asked, what can we do about it? So I'm going to leave that with you to build up to a point of what can we do about what we're hearing about this evening. is the question on the table.
Right. Okay. So, increase in percentage of black children. The actual statistics for it are that the first time entrance into the criminal justice system went up. Initially it was 9% were
Okay.
black. It
Mhm,
went up to 16%. So just
mhm.
under 100% increase. Now, to put this in perspective, black people, this is people that are of African or Caribbean descent in the UK, only make up 3.4% of the population,
I know.
right? But
Sorry, I
somehow,
knew that. I know you don't know that as viewers, but I knew that as as someone who lived there. So when you said 16%, I was like, they were just raiding everyone's home then?
well,
Because how you get that many children is actually beyond us.
as I said, it needs to be put into perspective of what the population makeup of black people is in the UK. Um, so yeah, where was I? Right. We had a conversation, and I think it's important to point out that Henny has asked, "What can we do about it?" And I think it's important to say that one of the beginning points is to push back on the narratives that we see being presented in the media, right?
Okay. So step
So, for
1,
example,
push back on the narratives that we hear. Okay.
right? And the reason I'm introducing this now is because actually it's relevant to what has happened in the UK, in that there has been this media push to present knife crime as a real threat.
Mhm,
But what they've done is they've attached a face to this knife crime so that when you see knife crimes occur,
mhm,
it's always a black face.
mhm. Young
And
black male face.
right. And more often than not, when they do this, it's a white
Mhm,
victim,
mhm, mhm.
right? If they show the picture of the victim is either white or extremely young,
Yeah. Damalola Taylor.
right?
Mhm,
If if it's a black teenager who stabs another black teenager, you only get the face of the person who stabbed.
mhm.
Okay, you almost never ever see white faces presented when it comes to knife crime. And so what it does is it presents this picture that it is black people that are predominantly responsible for knife crime. And what they've done is they've said knife crime is such a massive problem. It's a massive problem. And they trot out blackface after blackface after blackface. Well, here's the thing knife crime rates are 5% lower now than they were in 2010. And
Mhm,
we never had such intense media scrutiny,
mhm.
right? And so you need to now start asking why. What's the narrative? What's going on here? Um, and I couldn't give you a definitive answer for that. But as I said, the question has to be asked: why is this narrative being pushed in this manner at this time when the actual incidents are lower than they were historically?
Well, I think that to ask to kind of keep to the question, I think there needs to be a little bit of a wider narrative put on this. And Akala talks about this, and it's talked about quite frequently in media, which is that the highest rates of knife crime from 2010 to 2015 were occurring in Scotland. They were
Glasgow,
occurring in predominantly,
particularly Glasgow.
particularly Glasgow, in particularly white areas within the England ratio as well. The most people carrying out those crimes were white children. From that time onwards, they were not represented in the media. They weren't represented as a threat. And I remember working in inner city London. I worked at Lewisham, a school in Lewisham with predominantly Black children. And I do remember the media starting to build this narrative that young Black boys were problematic and they had knives and this, that, and the other. And when the pushback to that narrative started to happen, the media intensified. So you began to see people like Akala come out, educated people come out and begin to say, hey, actually, the statistics aren't bearing out what you're saying about knife crime being an inner city London Black problem. It's an urban problem, the code word for being Black, of course. It's actually a widespread issue across the country and it's affecting people. And I remember there was this mothers group of white mothers who came onto the TV and was like, it's affecting these white kids up in, I don't remember, some northern town, so on and so forth. And they were being brushed under the carpet. But the narrative that was being pushed was that it was an inner city London Black youth problem. And so I know, I think I know who's asked the question. You have to then ask yourself, in your country, because this person isn't from the UK, what narrative surrounding crime is being pushed? What do you think of when you think of particular crimes in the country that you're from? What faces wear those crimes? What's the first image that comes to mind? And when you think about that, then it's time to say, why is that? It's not, well, because people aren't predisposed to crime because of the color of their skin. We know this. The majority of the world are Black, brown people, so they're not predisposed to crime because of the color of their skin. So why do I have the impression that whenever this particular crime is mentioned, which may be a crime of opportunity, poverty, and many other issues, I associate that color, and then I have to then start to ask my media outlets, send letters, write, tweet them. You know, tweeting is the great way of equalizing all media outlets. You know, put the stuff out there and say, your reporting is biased. I need to start calling out biased reporting. And it's really simple. Whenever I'm consuming a piece of media, a piece of news in my country, and I think, why have you labeled this person in that way? Can I bite back on that? And that's really important, because one of the ways that children are affected, and we are talking about the criminality of children in this particular one, or crime, and I can't make that sentence work in a way that my brain processes it correctly, is that to criminalize them from a very young age, to make them appear older, to make them appear as if they're predisposed to crime. So if you're not actively fighting that narrative, psychologically actively fighting that narrative that these people are predisposed to crime, when you see a child behaving as a child, you will make a criminal association where if the child were white, you might not make that association. And that is the first step to undoing this work, is to actually all of us, everybody, Black, white, Asian, everybody that lives in a country, to actually undo that thinking. That's our first step.
Yeah. And I think it's important also that we recognize that the lens through which society views crime is a classist one.
Yes.
Okay. That's why you have white collar crime and blue collar crime, right? So, just to explain this, I could embezzle 10 million, pounds, euros, dollars from a company, and that will be called a white collar crime. And chances are I'm probably going to get an easier sentence than somebody who went down to a local store, robbed it of £100, dollars, or euros,
Yeah.
and ran off with the cash, because that's considered a blue collar crime. So we need to look at where class intersects with the criminal justice system. The problem is that it's an intersection of class and race. And it's important for white people to understand, poor white people to understand, that the overcriminalization of Black people only aids in the overcriminalization of you.
Yeah. Of poor white people. Yeah, absolutely.
right?
Because this,
Um,
when we talk about the case that we're talking about, of course, they were locking up predominantly all of the people that they locked up were poor children. They were
right?
majority black and brown children, but there were white children that were being locked up as well because by virtue of the fact that you were poor, this is a poverty issue. And I can't say that frequently enough. Poverty kills. It really does kill.
And
Um,
as I said, the intersectionality here is, or what has to be understood, I think, by poor white people is that because they are doing it to black children, they have the precedent to do it to your children, which is why, even in this case that we're talking about, it wasn't only black children that were locked up in this facility. There was a fair number of white children too, but there was an overrepresentation
yep,
of black
absolutely.
people
You talk
within
about
this.
1,500 children in a short few years span that they locked up
Right.
illegally. I mean,
So yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the time.
yes.
Sorry, gotta roll on.
Sorry.
So, in summation, in the UK, overall prison numbers are going down of those entering the youth justice system for the first time. The proportion of black black children has increased, and during that same period, for some mysterious reason, sentencing durations have also increased. Right.
Shocking.
So we've now looked at Australia. We've now looked at the UK. We've started off with the US, Canada,
Do we have to?
right? So I'm going to give you a quote, right? The quote, Canadian government implemented legislation and measures to remove Indigenous people from land they occupied for settlement. This resulted in the creation of harmful programs such as the residential school system that was created with the intent to assimilate Indigenous children and destroy Indigenous cultures, identities, and traditions. The history of these policies and laws caused the collapse of Indigenous social, economic, and governance orders on both macro and micro levels. For instance, the breakdown of family and community structures has left generations of Indigenous peoples addressing severe mental health issues, as well as issues relating to violence and addiction. And this comes from a governmental report. It's titled Overrepresentation of Indigenous Youth in Canada's Criminal Justice System. And you can get that from the Government of Canada's website. So I would ask you, think of that. Now think back to what we said of Australia. Right? They took the children away. When you took the children away, what happened? You destabilized the community. You destabilize all of these things. And it was all done intentionally. So now you've done this, you've looked back through the historical lens, and you've said taking children away from Indigenous parents is not right. It has bad outcomes for everybody, right? So, what are the current statistics for the youth in or Indigenous youth in Canada?
I'm going to imagine that there's somewhere between 16 and 50% that they are in the United States, that they are in Australia, and that they are in the UK. UK was at 16. You know, it's yeah, it's I'm sure some sort of figure between 16 and 50%, 50 times more likely to end up yeah, more
Do you
there.
know what? I actually haven't written it down in my notes. I read it and when I was doing the research for this, and I can't find it in my notes, but it's ridiculously high.
Of course, because it's ridiculously high in every other country.
Right?
Well, I think you've made a very clear case, Mr. Storm.
Right.
Okay.
But what I was going to say was that this isn't just relevant to Indigenous people within Canada, it's also related to the Black people within Canada.
Yes.
So, another quote. Young Black men face racism, poverty, lack of opportunity, social isolation, violence in their neighborhoods, family challenges, and unemployment. Once these men are known to police, systemic issues stack the deck against already disadvantaged groups. And this is from Rankin and Windsor, Unequal Justice, Aboriginal and Black inmates disproportionately fill on Ontario jails. So, my case is that these governments create the system that breeds the environment that births the problem.
Yeah.
Right. And this isn't just applicable to where we see described in Canada, where they talk about the natives and Black people. You see it in Australia. You see it in the overcriminalization of Black kids in the US. You see it in the overcriminalization of Black children in the USA. So, where do we see this in the USA? I say this because the ghettos were intentionally created. You created, because I said, you create the system that breeds the environment. So you created the ghettos through redlining in the USA, and you funneled all the Black people in there. You wouldn't let them live in white neighborhoods, right? So you create the system that breeds the environment, the ghettos that births the problems, poverty, crime, mental health issues. All of these things come about. Now, within these systems, to support these systems, and just to show you just how much this was intentionally designed, historically, in order to get welfare and housing assistance in the US, you could not have a man living in the house. So you funneled poor Black people into ghettos, then told
On top
them
of each other.
that if you want to live in this accommodation, you cannot have your husband or your partner living in the house with you, right? So the policy of separating husband and wife, father from children, that you had in slavery is simply done in another guise or form.
Yeah.
It's the same policies being carried over and implemented in different ways that lead to the breakdown of the family structure, that then dissolve community cohesion, that then breed mental health issues and intergenerational trauma. And it's all done by design, and it's all done under the guise of, or much of it is done under the guise of juvenile justice systems. Right? Now, we talked about the fact that it was business. Okay? And that this juvenile system was a business. It's a hustle. So, we spoke of Australia, USA, Canada, and Britain. All four of
the Netherlands as well.
When we touch on the Netherlands, I'm not too sure about the Netherlands justice system, but all four of these countries that I focused on in particular have all experimented with private prisons. The only one that doesn't have any right now is Canada, because they shut theirs down in the early 2000s. Right. But you still have private contractors lobbying to try and get them back running prisons. And just to show you the problem of involving profit in juvenile justice systems, I don't know if you remember the Kids for Cash scandal. Right?
Sadly, I do.
For those that don't know, this was a scandal in the US, similar to the one that we spoke about at the beginning of the case. Right? I can't prove that the judge was getting any kickbacks from the detention center or any private entities, but her actions would seem to suggest she was motivated by something other than love and kindness. What you determine that to be, I leave that down to your imagination. But the Kids for Cash scandal was where these judges were caught. Um, they were being paid and given kickbacks by private detention centers for juveniles to send send people that the children that appeared before them to jail. So the judges were giving out disproportionately harsh sentences for things that they shouldn't have been sending these children to any detention for.
Mhm.
An investigation into one of the judges led to all adjudications by him between the period of 2003 to 2008 being vacated and their records expunged. Right? In 2009, the Supreme Court ruled that the rights of thousands of children had been ignored. And that was one judge violating the rights of thousands of children. And I want you to think about the trauma that that does to a child being put into that system. Studies have been done showing that locking up children does not improve the chances of them in life. It only increases the chances of recidivism, and that they will appear before judges as adults and enter the adult criminal justice system.
Yeah.
Right. So think about the thousands of children. We expunged their records of as children, but how many did you traumatize and set on the path to become adult criminals?
Mhm.
Are you then going to be saying we're going to expunge those things because actually everything comes from the fruit of the poisonous tree? No, the system doesn't work like that. The
You have a
system is
three-strike rule.
right.
1, 2, 3, and you're in for life.
The system is able to wrong you, right? Especially if you're poor, right? If you're black, yes, but as I said,
Poverty.
we cannot escape the intersection of class and justice.
Mhm.
The fact that there was that white guy that got away with that crime, I can't remember what it was, and he pleaded affluenza.
I'm
In
sorry, what
other
now?
words, right. In other words, I can't remember what the crime was, but he pleaded to his case, his defense before the court was that he was so rich that he was unaware of the consequences of his actions. And the court accepted that as a defense. He did not go to jail. He was not convicted. So understand what that
Somebody needs
says,
to link that in the comments, yeah, so when you all find that case, just link that in the comments for me to go back and read
right?
that one. I've not read that one. That's
I have
ridiculous.
so much money, I do not know the what the possible outcomes of my actions are. And the courts accepted that. People accepted that, and he walked away. You can Google the case, affluenza.
Okay. Okay.
So, yes, in short, I see the youth justice systems as extensions of policies enacted by colonial nations to take away the children of indigenous people and people of color, and as an attempt to destabilize communities and building strong communities.
Okay, so Henny just asked, was it before a jury or did he do it just in juvenile court? Was affluenza
I believe it was juvenile because it was a juvenile case, and I think it was the
so
judge that
not
accepted.
before a jury, just before a judge and the lawyers and just I can't even I don't even have words for this. Okay, so we've had a really
So
depressing one.
just to give you the details, the guy's name who got away with it was Ethan Couch, and he was age
Ethan
16 when he killed 4 people while driving under the influence.
Ethan Couch.
Yeah.
Okay, I've put that in the comment section. I may have spelt his surname wrong, but that's the case that you can look up. And driving under the influence. Oh, dear Lord, anyway. There are days. There are days. Okay, so this, I will be honest and say, this whole case that started, the ProPublica was on the 8th. The article that was released, an article before that was released, a few days before that on this case, and it has spun a really depressing story. One that maybe I could argue I had not turned a blind eye to, but lived with the discomfort of. I know that the prison to pipeline exists, prison to school to prison pipeline exists. I knew that. I worked in inner city London. I've worked with young Black youth. I know that this is a reality. I had a student hide in my classroom because they were afraid the police were outside, and they just were so scared that they had done nothing wrong, but they were just so petrified of the police that they wanted to give up. I'm so glad you're still watching us. Thank you. I appreciate you for sticking around. We're wrapping up now. We're taking it home. But I really struggled with this one. I really struggled because once you know that it's this bad for poor children around the world in so-called developed nations, once you know that they're locking up, incarcerating, funneling kids through the system, once you know that, you can't unsee that. And so I'm going to go back to the question that Henny, I want to kind of conclude with the question that Henny asked, which is, what can we do about this situation? What can we do about not having this knowledge now that it is as bad as we think it is? What can we do? And so I'm going to go on. No, go on.
Well, I was going to say, I think we can look at what has been done historically. And once again, we need to talk about the narratives that are coming out. So, for example, people talk about Malcolm X, people talk about the Black Panthers, and they're given the label of radical Black extremists, when actually, when you dig down, Malcolm in particular and the Black Panthers were particularly concerned with the welfare of Black people. But what they understood was that this was a class issue, right? And so they worked with poor white people. You look into the history of the Black Panthers, and you will see Huey Newton went down south in the States and was working with people that were in the Klan, who left the Klan as a result of working with Newton, right? And he was going down there and he was working with the poor miners to get them better working rights and conditions and pay and all of these things, because this is a class issue. And a rising tide lifts all ships. And it's about when poor white people understand that you and a poor Black person have more in common than you and a rich white person, then we can start to work together to achieve things that will benefit the whole community, all of us. And I think we need to start looking back historically at some of the things that these organizations and people are doing. So they were putting on morning kitchens for children that were poor and didn't have money, so that they could go to school with food and then concentrate on their studies, because a hungry child can't concentrate. So they'd feed the children. The children then go to school. You get a better education. You come out, you can get a better job. That money then comes back into the community. It enriches the community. And it's all of these policies, things like this, that start to improve the lot for everybody.
Well, I think off the back of that, I want to mention too, because you've mentioned the Black Panthers, and I want to mention the Black Panthers, and I want to mention the UK Saturday School program. And I know as Seventh-day Adventist that doesn't sit well, but I want you to understand the program. Regardless of days, I want you to understand the programming, right? So the Saturday School program in the UK came about because the education system wasn't for Black people in the UK. So when Black people arrived, they didn't want to have them in classrooms. They didn't want to have them in schools. When they did, they had to legally, but the children were treated badly. And so Saturday schools arose because the people said, Black people said, for us, we need to just fix this. We need to get our kids educated. The school ain't going to do it, so we're going to do it. And they would teach math, they would teach English, they would teach science, but they would also teach history. And by history, I mean history, like not just European history, but history, world history, you know, the normal, like the regular stuff that happens in the
Don't
world.
ask, how did the indigenous people of the United States exaggerate their poor treatment?
Right? Okay, so they did that. Equally, in the United States of America, the Black Panther movement was doing a very similar program in which they were running after school programs. And what they would do is they would, as Mr. Storm has pointed out, they would first look at the children. So they'd first look at the morning programs for feeding the children, and then those children would return in the afternoons and they would be enrolled in after school programs, and they would run after school programs to supplement the education, but to actually ensure that the children were educated. These are really simple, easy programs that I think that churches have run in the past and that have fallen by the wayside as we've got more rights. And listening to, as I say, the podcast I listened to earlier was really inspiring. Just talk about decolonializing. It's so important that children are given these opportunities to not be turned into criminals, but that poor children are given the opportunity to be educated. You know, this program works in India. They're doing a feed-in program in the slums in India at the moment, where you go into certain slums, they're going in and they're feeding the children. And when you look at that news story, and I'll never forget, the woman said the children can't concentrate. If they're hungry, they can't learn anything. So we take care of one problem. And because we're taking care of this one problem, then the children are able to go into schools. And I think in some Western countries, we have this idea, but we don't have poor people in our country. Of course you do. Of course you do. Everyone does. The poor are always with us because we live in a capitalist society and we don't want to pay people properly to do their jobs, and poverty exists. Like, let's not be blind to that. And so there are simple things that your local community can do, your local churches, that are proven to work. They're proven historically that they actually change the lives of the children and move them from the criminal justice system into the education system and move them along into jobs and into the community in healthy ways. This has been proven. It was so successful in the UK that they shut the program down. So you know how that goes. I mean, the Saturday school program was amazing, but they worked systematically to remove them by pretending that they were giving rights to people. Anyway, different thing. So I think that there are ways that we can actually impact beyond what we think we can do. So I think the step one that we looked at earlier was looking for bias in our own thinking. When we think of, you know, if you're a UK citizen, you think of knife crime, you immediately think of a young Black guy. Why do you think of that? Black people will have the same image as white people. We're all socialized into the same system. For Americans, when they think of gang violence, they don't think of the white criminals, they think of the Black criminals. They're not thinking of the Italians, they're not thinking of the mob, but they're thinking of, you know, why do you think that way? That's something for you to unpack. Look at the poverty policies that surround your local environment. What policies are there surrounding children? What groups are actively working to eradicate food poverty for children, to eradicate access to after-school programs? In the Netherlands, a child is considered poor if it doesn't go to an after-school program. Have you surveyed the children of your local community that you're in touch with as a church, as members, as people around, to say, are you all in after school programs? What are you guys doing? That will be an immediate bell ring for you in the Netherlands, let's say, that you know that child is on the poverty list. You know that they're not doing that. How are they funding that program? If you know the parents and you think, that's a bit, they're doing football or what have you, or how are you getting into the football club? What happened? You can ask children interested questions to figure out what the needs are in your local community. And I think it cannot be overemphasized enough. We need to get hold of more teachers, more educators, more people looking at these textbooks, looking at our education system and saying decolonialize. We need new books, we need new authors, we need new curriculum, we need to change the way that we educate people, because if you don't get it right at nursery, you're not going to get it right at 16, and in between you are funneling these kids into the criminal justice system.
And one last point, vote.
Vote,
And
yes.
vote strategically. Vote strategically locally, vote strategically nationally.
Yes.
And vote for governments and parties and that have policies regarding doing better for people and not businesses. Businesses will always do well. Businesses will always be businesses. People have needs. There will be somebody who's going to sell you something to fulfill those needs.
Right.
But what are we doing to take care of people? So that will be my final thing of what each of us can do individually, and that is vote wisely.
So I think, thank you for joining us this evening. Thanks, Henny, for your comments. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you for watching. I hope that if you're watching this on replay, you can still get involved in the discussion. There are still things that we can do. It has really given me pause for thought about what I'm doing in my local area and what can I do to affect change. And I think that we all have to consider the importance of the poorest among us. What are we doing? You know, I come from a Christian background. The Bible is what I hold dear. And Jesus asks, if you did that for the poorest, then you did it for me. And I have to ask the question, what are we doing for the poorest among us? So it's another dark side. It was a longer one than normal. You saw I took off the time because I was like, this thing is going over. I'm not even bothering with this time schedule anymore. I was supposed to fit it all in an hour. I will never know. But I'd like to thank Mr. Storm. Are there any final words of encouragement you would like to give? Come back next week.
Hit the like button, share it with people, because you don't want to hear my words of this.
Oh, bless you. So come back next week. We will be discussing, I'm sure, something else very controversial that will cause me to have a difficult week again. But watch this space. If you have a topic, there is something on your heart that you'd like us to actually look into, we do the research. We can't promise to be experts in everything, but we try our best to ensure that we've actually read the material, done the work, and we're bringing you as up-to-date information as we can. If there are links that you need, please do feel free to contact us. And as always, like, subscribe, and share. I have to do this thing. I hear the teenagers doing it. That's the voice I have in my head. Every time I say it, I hear like the gamers on YouTube who go, like, subscribe, and share. Like, subscribe, and share.
Henny asked what he could do to help, so he can hit the like button, and that'll help us with the algorithms so that more people will get information.
Well, guys, listen, thank you so much for sticking with us. I know it was a difficult topic. I know that this was really hard. We appreciate you. God bless. Good night and peace. There you go.